This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Well, welcome everybody. Can you hear me all right in the back there? Yes. Welcome to all of you. Some of you were here at some of the earlier sessions, and some of you have joined us for this one, and that's great. And welcome back to Salman Rushdie, who you've all heard of, and he's sitting right here. This is his 8th year coming back here, and as the author of novels, screenplays, essays, memoirs, Salman Rushdie has stretched the boundaries of all of these genres. He has given his prose the musicality and cadences of Urdu and Hindi. Writing in English, he has indeed confirmed English as an Indian language. And it's to that question of English that I want to turn to in today's program. And I want to start with a quote by Srinivas Arvamudan, who is a professor of English at Duke University of Indian origin. And the beginning of his book, which is entitled Guru English, South Asian Religion in a Cosmopolitan Language, he says, "It's a truism, universally acknowledged, that English dominates the globe today as no language has in the recorded history of humanity." And he continues to say, "English dominates by virtue of its stranglehold on global organizations as an international auxiliary or link language." And he says, I'm skipping sentences here a little bit, a comparison of the current dominance of English with that of other languages at different times leads to the discovery that empires and religions have been the two most obvious vehicles of linguistic universalism. And he compares English to some extent with Latin and Arabic, have been languages that have, because of religion and empire in one way or another, have had historically wide reach. And just one quick quote. He says, "It's not merely the political dispensation at hand that ensures English supremacy at this point. The cultural and technical vocabularies of science and technology, capitalist business economics, and television and media have instituted an even more important role for English to play as the ultimate knowledge base from which other languages can be launched or situated in relation to one another." And the third largest group of English language speakers are in India. So we can skip over how English got to India originally and how it evolved, but I want to just conclude because I want to ask Salman Rushdie to kind of take it from here. Arvamudan says, "It's only in recent decades that greater attention is being paid by the literati to the imaginative and innovative function of cultural production supported by dialectical as well as political independence. Post-independence writers from G.V. Dasani to Salman Rushdie, it's right here in the book, and Indian cinema and media have since disseminated an Indian English dialect with regional variants that has gone global and is in its quest for new markets and audiences." So my first question to you, sir, is to comment on English, since that's the language you write in.
Well, you know, one thing to say about India is that also entrenches English is that the law is in English. You know, the penal code is in English. And as everyone knows, if you translate the law, you change the law.
Right.
You know, any lawyer will tell you that. You know? So that's a very entrenched situation. The Constitution's in English. You know? I myself was not at all convinced, as a young writer, I was not at all convinced that English would remain a literary language in India. In the aftermath of you know, the post-colonial moment. I thought it was entirely possible that it would no longer be interesting to Indian writers to express themselves in English, and that the many other languages of India would be the languages in which literature would proceed. You know, and that's to say, when I was writing Midnight Children, I mean, I had, at that time I had very little expectation of anything more than just publication. I mean, I had no sense of what that book might, what happened to that book. Was something that I could not have anticipated. But I did think maybe I'm at the end of something, not at the beginning of something. And I remember going to India after the book came out. Can you all hear? Is that right? Going to India soon after the book came out and being asked by people what other Indian writers of my generation I liked. And the truth was, and I was not trying to be a smartass, but I couldn't think of any. I could think of writers older than myself. I could think of writers like, Anita Desai and Narayan and Lisani and Mulk Rajanand and Raja Rao and, even occasionally Khushwant Singh. Very occasionally.
Very occasionally.
But, in my own generation, looking around, I just, I saw a kind of empty landscape. And that's why I thought maybe this isn't going to continue, And then, of course, what happened was what happened, this extraordinary explosion of writing in English. And what I like about it now is how varied and diverse that explosion. I mean, for there to be a healthy literature, there has to be a large diversity in forms of writing, and now you have everything from very arcane literary production to very, very demotic popular fiction. You have science fiction, you have schlock fiction, you have 50 Shades of Chetan Bhagat, at one end and kind of Amit Chaudhary at the other, and kind of everything in between. And that seems to me to demonstrate the health of a literature, when there is not just one kind of production, not just kind of high literary fiction, but everything. And even high literary fiction of many different kinds. No real agreement in how the subject should be approached. And I think maybe the last thing that's happening that needs to happen for the literature to be fully developed is that Indian writers no longer feel the need always to write about India. So you have a writer like Rana Dasgupta, who I think is one of the most talented of the younger writers. And his first book was called Tokyo Cancelled and took place in airline lounges outside India. His second book was about Bulgaria, and only now, after being quite established as a writer, has he written a non-fiction book about his hometown, about Delhi, which is his new book. But that idea, Western writers always gave themselves the liberty to write about anywhere. Fitzgerald could set a novel on the Riviera. Hemingway could write about Spain. Nobody said that they were deracinated. They didn't stop being American writers because they didn't write about America. Whereas for a long time, there was a kind of spoken or unspoken pressure on Indian writers to write about India. And if not, what are you playing at? I mean, Updike wrote one of the worst novels ever written about Africa, The Coup.
Been spared that one.
But and it's an imaginary African country in which there's a coup, and believe me, don't read it. Bellow could write Henderson the Rain King, set in an African country. It never occurred to them not to, if that's the idea that they wanted to pursue. And I think it's the last freedom that Indian literature has to give itself. It's just that same freedom, write about wherever you want, write about whatever you want. You don't have to write about your hometown and the people who live next door, So I think it's been very interesting seeing, Midnight Children was 1981. So it's been talking about 3.5 decades, really, in which this literature has grown and matured in very interesting ways, I think. And now Pakistan as well. For a long time, Pakistani writers writing in English, kind of lagged behind. You know, I mean, there are a few writers, Zulfikar Ghosh, there are a few people, but now suddenly in this younger generation, there's an enormous number of very, very gifted Pakistani writers in English. You know, Muhammad Hanif, Daniel Muinuddin, Kamila Shamsi, Nadeem Aslam, whole range of them, you know, and one thing I think is interesting is that the Pakistani writers, these ones that I've just mentioned, many of them are still writing what you might call public fiction, you know, where they take on subjects to do with the public life of the country. Maybe because in Pakistan that's just so in your face that you have to deal with it, you know. The Indian writers of their generation, the younger, seem to be a little bit turning away from the public project, you know, and writing books which are less political, less assertive of a view of society, and a more private kind of fiction. You know, it just seems to be. I mean, fiction has fashion like everything else. You know, it has mood swings and tendencies. It goes this way and that way. But at this moment, it seems that it's Pakistan from which the more political fiction is coming, and India from where the less political fiction is coming, which wasn't, I mean, didn't used to be the case. No.
So it's a sign of that the residue of colonialism is fading as Indians write about things other than India.
Yeah, I just think, you know, it's a really long time ago, the British Empire. You know, I think I don't feel post-colonial. You know?
You don't look post-colonial.
I feel post-colonial.
Right.
I think we've got to that next point.
Yes.
I don't find, you know, you go to India now, nobody's talking about the British Empire. You know, nobody's thinking about the British Empire. It's gone, except that it left behind this gift of the language. You know, and I do think that English is a great gift. I think it's a remarkable language because it's so malleable. You know, you can, much more so than, for instance, French, which is just syntactically and in all sorts of ways much more classicist and rigid. You know, English lets you twist it and turn it, and it doesn't break. You know, so and that's, I think, other than all those excellent reasons which you read for the dominance of English, the other reason is how flexible it is. You know, so that the Irish can make an Irish English.
Right.
You know, Australians can make an Australian English. Caribbean people can make a Caribbean English. Americans, of course, have made many different kinds of English. You know, there's the English of African Americans, the English of the South, the English, you know, there's a whole range of Englishes available in America. So, and English has allowed that. You know, it's been capacious and malleable enough to permit people to find the way to express themselves in English that feels like them.
Right.
You know, and I think India is a little bit late to the party, to tell you the truth. You know, I think many of these other English literatures are much older, much better established. There's been Irish English, you know, since the 18th century.
Right.
You know, and so I think that's another reason why English has managed to take such root. You know, it is, yes, of course, it's to do with, you know, all those things.
What he said.
Yeah, what he said.
That guy.
No, I mean, I know Srinivas, and he's very smart, and I agree with him more or less completely about what he said. But I think the other thing is that people enjoy the use of English and have been able to make English feel to them like their own thing. You know, so I think if you are in the West Indies listening to people speak, and even Jamaica is not the same as Trinidad. You know, I mean, it's but you have people using a language which they feel is their own. You know, and I mean, Joyce said explicitly that one of his parts of his project was to liberate English from the possession of the English.
Right.
And I think that, you know, the Irish would very much feel that English was their own, you know, and so on. You know, so I think that India's finally joined the party.
I want to shift a little from the language to the folks who write in it, especially in India. That is the role of the writer in Indian society particularly in the present time. The writer as a public figure, the writer as an entertainer, as a celebrity, as a provoker, as one who inspires, one that confounds the reader, writer as activist, writer as conscience. How do you understand? You have some experience with this. How do you understand the role
that's
of the
really
writer?
all of that is really Arundhati Roy. You know?
Yeah.
And not a whole lot of others, actually, because I have the sense, not very, slightly depressing sense, that writers are not particularly listened to in India anymore. You know, I don't think anybody gives it. I'm sure we'll get round to talking about what's happening with Wendy Doniger and so on, but I think that's it's an aspect of that nobody cares about these things except a small group. And even that small group is very conflicted and ambiguous about the way in which it deals with it. So I think there's been a great loss of literary influence in India. There are figures, clearly who have some stature, like Arundhati, like Vikram Seth, like, and some journalists who've been very prominent for a long time and who have a kind of prominence, a kind of voice because of that. And it's good to see that those people do use that position in order to, to use the platform in order to say things that need to be said. And I just worry that not that many people are listening anymore. Not that unlike America. There's a great line in Italo Calvino's novel, If on a Winter's Night a Traveller. Oh, you can't hear? All right, how about that? Is that better? All right. In Calvino's novel, If on a Winter's Night a Traveller, there's a moment where one of the characters says to another, you can always tell how highly a country values literature by the size of the apparatus it sets up to control it. And by that standard, the Soviet Union valued literature very highly, and the United States not so much. And I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
That the way in which writers and intellectuals were effective in opposing Soviet communism, spoke to the great regard that people had for Solzhenitsyn and so on. Here, I have the feeling that nobody's that interested. In Europe, it goes up and down. In India, I have the sense that people aren't that interested anymore. The casualness, of the attacks on the arts in India now, and the kind of broad acceptance, or let's say the inertia of the mass of the public to the fact that these things are being done. It arouses very little outrage, very little commentary. There's a kind of assumption that if you've got yourself banned, it's your fault because you did something you shouldn't have. It's very damaging. I think the Indian culture is, I was in India last year when the film of Midnight's Children came out there, and I said something which I think is true, that the Midnight's Children at its climax deals with the emergency period, and of course that was a political emergency.
Right.
And what I said is that now I think India is in the middle of a cultural emergency, and that the levels of repression in the cultural area, should worry us as much as the political repressions of the mid-70s emergency. But the thing that's in a way most worrying is that it doesn't worry people. There isn't enough concern about it. And so everybody gets away with this over and over again. This same guy, Batra, who went after Wendy Doniger, is the same guy who got Delhi University to take Ramanujan's Ramayana essay off the syllabus, the 300 Ramayans, right, which had been the core essay of the syllabus for decades. So what is shocking is how this one pathetic individual can have such a consequence without anybody just smacking him down and telling him to go home and grow up, you know. So yeah, I think it's a very worrying time for culture in India, and not just writing. You know, I think the Hussain case is an example, and it's not just the exile of Hussain. There was that, I forget his name, the artist, the gay artist in Delhi whose work was attacked at a gallery last year. You know, so painting, scholarship, literature, cinema, you know, everything is under attack. And the government and the administration, the police force, on the whole, sides with the attackers, not with the people being attacked. You know, and so if I was an Indian artist now, I would worry very deeply about the future in India. You know, I mean, Wendy Doniger is, you know, she's in Chicago. She could continue with her work. I'm here. I can continue with my work. You know, as you may have heard, I mean, for me to go to India, it becomes very troublesome now. Yeah. You know, yeah. and there's a part of me that doesn't want to go. Why would you want to go and put yourself in the middle of that garbage? You know, to be surrounded by 200 armed men. You know, I'm more worried about them. You know, who killed Indira Gandhi? Her bodyguard. Who killed Salman Taseer in Pakistan? His bodyguard. I don't want bodyguards.
It's the people. It's the people assigned to protect you. You have to worry about, right?
Yeah. If there's 200 people around you carrying guns, the likelihood is that if there's going to be a gun used, it's going to be one of those 200 people. You know, and I would sooner they weren't around.
Right. Right.
You know, I mean, last time I was in Bombay, friends of mine invited me to dinner, and the police, who had come at their own accord and refused to go away even though I told them I didn't want them, said, "Oh, you can't go to that area, there's a lot of Muslims who live there." And I said, "Look, it's my friend's house, you know, and you can come with me or not, but I can take a taxi, it's fine." So then they came across the street from the house, there's a hospital. The next day in the newspapers in Bombay, there was full saying, "Was Salman Rushdie in hospital last night?" You know, because there was this huge, you know, police bandobast outside the hospital, and the rumor is that he was sick and he was taken to this hospital. And I said to them, "Look, if you hadn't been there, I was just quietly having dinner with my friends." You know, the problem is created by you guys doing this kind of tamasha in the street, you know, to show off how big you are. So I think, for me, it's very difficult now in India, you know, and I feel very sad about what's happening there, genuinely, because I think this is not the country that I love. Yeah. It's not.
You made the comment in your, if I'm paraphrasing you reasonably closely, that last night in your wonderful, upon arrival, your wonderful talk about stories are everywhere and belong to everybody.
Yeah.
And following up on not only writers but scholars, people who write about India, about Indian stories, about Indian religions, about Indian culture, about Indian ways of life. Now that everything is available to everybody 24/7, do you sense that that creates a kind of anxiety in a way that?
Well, it does amongst people who want the stories to be in their control. You know? Because I mean, it's true about, you know, it's true of the Satanic Verses, it's true of Wendy Doniger's book. If you want it in India, you download it.
Right.
You know, so you've actually got to the point where it's impossible to ban a book.
Right.
You know, it's a kind of ridiculous thing to ban a book, because the book is always available. The only, as far as I know, the only example I've ever seen of a witty remark by an Iranian Ayatollah, I will share with you that this was a gentleman, I've forgotten his name, who was given the task of censoring the internet opposition websites in Iran.
Oh,
you know,
right.
And he would shut down a website and 10 more would come up over here and so on. It was a mug's game. And he said at one point that really it was impossible to do this. And he said, "It's like removing a ladder to stop birds sitting on the roof."
Okay.
and that's one of the wonderful things about the information age is that you can remove the ladder, but you can't stop birds sitting on the roof. So anybody in India who wants to read Wendy Doniger's book can read it today. And I gather the Amazon number is 11.
Yeah, I think it's.
And for a 5-year-old book of religious studies by a scholar at the University of Chicago to be number 11 of all books on Amazon
It's not.
reveals that it's quite a good thing sometimes your book to get in trouble.
I'm mindful we're about halfway through, and
Yeah.
we now want to open it up for your comments and questions for Salman Rushdie. We have somebody with a microphone walking around, so yes.
So much of your writing brings politics in, and I wondered if we could get some insights from you on where you see India going politically in the next few months.
Your guess is as good as mine, but nowhere good. I mean, if the choice is not a good one. I mean, between Modi and Rahul, really? I mean, who would you vote for? I mean, I know who I would not vote for, but I mean, I think actually, truthfully, I think probably the BJP is going to be the big winner in the election, and therefore will very possibly form the next government. And I find the prospect very worrying indeed to have Narendra Modi as Prime Minister of India. But that seems like what's going to happen. And I think some of the stuff that's going on now, things like these Hindu actions now, I mean, imagine what it's going to be like when the BJP is the government. So it's as worrying as it can be. But on the other hand, Congress has such dirty hands as well that you can't really see them as the good guys. And I don't know what will happen with the AAP and all the parties like that. I mean, it's I don't know, it's very new. The AAP is well organized in Delhi and did a very good job and so on. I mean, how well or badly it can translate that onto a national scale, I mean, I have no idea, really. And even if it did, it would be unlikely ever to be a majority party. And so then the question is, the coalition game comes into play, and I don't know. But I mean, the specter of Modi, I think, is a very real one now.
Hi, my name's Justin. I'm a junior in the college. I just want to ask you, talking about cultural emergency, I saw a very comparable parallel that happens in China because both India and China are emerging emerging countries in Asia, but as people are trying to pursue material wealth and they're losing their identities from their culture and who they are in the face of Western trends and fashions. So how do you think young writers today in India can pursue their dreams and cultural identities in this wave?
Well, I think I'm not worried about the writers themselves. I think there's a lot of very fine and serious writers working in India, who are doing what you suggest that they should. The problem is not that. The problem is of a trend in the culture which dislikes some of the things that literature has always been about. Literature is about breaking rules. It's about not doing the conventional thing. It's about pushing boundaries. It's about taking risks, finding new ways to do things that haven't been done before. And yes, it can be about satire. It can be about sarcasm. It can be destructive. It doesn't have to be constructive. Literature is not always about positive things. You can't just tell us a nice story. That's not what it's about. Literature at its best has always challenged a society, not just described it. And that challenge is a valuable one. Sometimes it can be a very useful thing in a society for writers, intellectuals to ask questions which force people to look at things they don't want to look at, you know, and to have conversations they don't want to have. And it's just one of the ways in which a society moves forward. You know, there are many ways, but that's one of the ways. Now, to suddenly say that literature must not do that, it must behave itself, or else, that does something very worrying. And as in the case of the Doniger book, there is this very worrying part of the penal code, which makes it a criminal offense to intentionally outrage religious feelings. Now, intentionally is a weasel word. You know, it's very, very difficult to prove intent. You know, and if, as it's interpreted, simply doing the thing proves that you intended to do it, then you're ipso facto guilty. You know, so all that has to happen is somebody with a religious inclination stands up, points a finger, and says, "My religion is offended by that," and by his accusation, you are guilty. You know, and the penal code doesn't allow you to defend yourself. There's no defense. And this is why, really, I think Penguin threw in the towel, because they were advised there's no way you can win the case. You know, because the way the law is written, you will lose the case. So that's worrying in itself, that the law is like that. What compounds that is that in case after case after case, the people held responsible for, the people blamed have been the people under attack. You know? So in this case, that ridiculous accusation by Batra that we've all read with the kind of absurd language, you know, you know to see.
You know to see, right?
Which is a new one on me, but
Yeah.
I think that I want to use it. It's a good title or something.
Yes. It'll appear in your next
Yeah.
novel, right?
Anyway, but in it, he clearly threatens violence.
Yeah.
He says, if you do not withdraw this book, we will commit acts of violence. Now, what should happen is that the police go around and arrest him for threatening violence. That's what should happen. Instead, the police hold Penguin responsible for the violence that someone else is threatening. You know? Yeah. And that's how cockeyed it's become. Nobody defends the right of people to say things that other people may not like. And if we have to never say something that somebody else doesn't like, nothing can be said. Nothing can be said. Because everything that someone says will offend somebody else. Just, I mean, plenty of things are said which offend me.
He's looking at me, did you know?
Yeah, no, I could give you a list. But, you know, this is just ordinary life in a free society. People say things you don't like. So what? You know, so what? I mean, I remember just towards the end of the last Pope, the person who I'm now told we should call ex-Benedict. Not my joke, but I'm happy to steal it. There was a cartoon in I think it was like the New York Post or somewhere, which showed the Pope, ex-Benedict Pope, and a group of cardinals around him, and he's looking at a desktop computer, and on the computer there's pictures of little boys. And the caption says, yes, and then you just click on the boy you like. Now, that's the Pope, right? And it's fairly disrespectful, right? Nobody burned the world down, you know. People read it, laughed, didn't laugh, were offended, were not offended, got on with their day. You know, that's how it works in a free society. You know, you don't expect people to only agree with you. You know? I mean, actually, I think Wendy Doniger's book, which I read 4 years ago, is an extraordinary book. I mean, it's not just not awful, it's actually exceptional. You know? And she is a scholar of the very first rank, you know, as was A.K. Ramanujan,
Right.
you know, and as is the 300 Ramayana essays. It's a brilliant essay, you know. And if what is now happening is the very finest scholarship that is being done is being kicked out because some jerk says it should, then Indian culture is in real danger. And as we know, the BJP already has this project to rewrite the textbooks, you know. And if that project succeeds, then children will be brought up believing garbage to be the truth. You know, I mean, I can remember reading the textbooks that used to exist that the British left, you know, and those textbooks were full of garbage. And then there was this moment, you know, in the 50s when the British textbooks were thrown out and the Indian, and suddenly we realized that Tipu Sultan wasn't a villain, he was a hero, you know, and all that, you know, the rewriting of Indian history to take the colonial emphasis out of it was valuable, you know, but now here's another project to rewrite the textbooks to fill them with lies again, you know, and that's going to be the government of India, you know. If I believed in God, I would say, God help us. But unfortunately, he's not available on account of not existing.
That's right. Here's, oh, you got?
First off, big fan. Thank you for being
Thank
here. You referred to having the different types of English in the world, the Irish English, the Australian English, whatnot. In terms of Indian English literature, do you think the liberal use, or I don't know whether it's liberal, but I'm thinking specifically of Amitav Ghosh's trilogy where he, for instance, he refers to being pregnant as having a roti in the chula. Do you think such
Oh, did he?
things, yeah, instead of a bun in the oven?
It's quite good for Amitav Ghosh.
Do you think that detracts from Indian literature, Indian English literature gaining widespread attention?
No, you know, I mean, it's interesting this, because what do you do when there are many languages in your head? You know, when like in India, essentially nobody is monoglot. You know, they say everybody to some degree is polyglot. You know, and in many cases, people speak several languages, you know, to some level of efficiency. So there's never just one noise in your head. There's always a number of noises in your head. And you're trying to use that. Now, there are other literatures which have done this before. I mean, actually, I remember I was saying to students in another class earlier that I remember as a young man beginning to read and being very affected by the post-war literature, which is of basically northeastern American Jewish American literature. So Roth, Bellow, Malamud, writers like this, and noticing the very liberal use of Yiddish, untranslated, unexplained, peppering the text. You know? I thought, well, if they can do it, I can do it. I mean, you know, all of those books use Yiddish expressions as though the reader would understand, which maybe in the narrow world, the reader would understand. You know, in the wider world, the reader would not. You know, I think in Portnoy, there's a line in which the narrator refers to being given a Zetz in the Kishkas. And I thought, excuse me? And then it becomes clear from context that some kind of injury has taken place. So a Zetz is clearly some kind of a blow, you know. But Kishkas, where are they? I mean, I have a number of theories about where they might be. And so I thought, well, okay, that's kind of fun to be able to leaven a language with other things like that. I mean, I think when it's done well, I mean, I haven't read the Amitav Ghosh book, but when it's done well, you can more or less make clear from context what is intended. That you may not know the swear word, but you know it's a swear word. You know, you may not know it refers to pregnancy specifically, but that the context of the sentence makes it clear that you are saying that somebody's pregnant. You know, you don't know that it's the literal meaning of the phrase. You don't know that it means that there's, you know, a bun in the oven. You know, but you know enough to get it. You know, and I think that's, I mean, it's always a decision when you use an untranslated word in a text, and you just have to make a judgment about whether you're giving the reader, the non-language speaking reader, enough to not put them off. I think, and I think you do it sometimes. I mean, I've written several books in which I haven't done that at all because it didn't seem to be appropriate for the language I was using in that book. And in other books where I'm trying to write a kind of more demotic kind of street speech language, then you feel, well, that's how people talk. People talk jumbling up languages, and you have to give at least a hint of that in the way you describe their dialogue. So, but I don't know, it's just there's no rule, it's just a judgment call every time, and you can get it right or wrong.
Paul, for those of us who are not completely familiar with the Wendy incident, I wonder if you could tell us what it was she wrote that turned out to be so offensive, and if
Well,
it's not, I seem to recall that at some point this happened to you too.
Yeah, I have a little.
Well,
Other people have noticed that.
Yeah, different gang, same problem. No, essentially, I mean, I put this very short, so this is, because her book is, it's this thick. But essentially what she's trying to do, and explicitly she says so, is to rescue Hinduism from the distortions of Hinduism placed upon it by the Hindu nationalist movement. And you could say that what Hindu nationalism of the BJP, Shiv Sena kind, RSS kind, has done is to make three falsifications of Hinduism. One is Hinduism has no collective act of worship. You go and perform your puja whenever you feel like it. You don't have to go to the temple. You don't have to. But there isn't like Sunday prayers. But of course, if you're running what's actually a crypto-fascist movement, you want Nuremberg rallies, and so you have to create a collective act of worship that doesn't exist in the tradition. Secondly, why is the Ramayana the sacred text? The Ramayana is only one of many texts. There are many parts of India in which the Ramayana is not interesting. Why not the Rig Veda? Why not anybody can say, anybody in this room I'm sure can say many texts that are at least as central to the Hindu tradition as the Ramayana. The Ramayana isn't even the oldest text. But in order to be this political movement, you have to have a unitary text. And anybody who deviates from the unitary text is blaspheming and must be stopped. And therefore Ram. Why Ram? Of all the gods of India, why Ram? As we know, I mean, Ram, after all, is only one of the incarnations of Vishnu, and the Vishnu thing is a big thing in India, but so is the Shiva thing. Why Ram? Why, I mean, in Bengal, why not Kali? In South India, why not Yelamma? I mean, all over the country you go, there are gods who are popular and not popular, not necessarily Ram. So suddenly you have Ram Rajya, the Ramayana, and Nuremberg rallies. And that creates Hindu fascism. And that's what they're trying to do. That's what they're trying to do. And what she is saying is that's not Hinduism. Hinduism is this enormously disparate and diverse group of beliefs, which you could in many ways separate into different religions. I mean, Shaivite worship, Vaishnavite worship, they're different things. Yes, they all have a reverence for the same kinds of group of sacred texts, of which the Ramayana is by no means the most important. Why not the Bhagavad Gita? Why not all sorts of things? And her book is there to say, here is the diversity, the richness, the variety of Hinduism as it has actually existed. It is not this thing that we are now told is Hinduism. That's what they don't like, because it opposes their political project.
Does that limit American academic freedom?
Well, I mean, she's lucky in that she's in America. She's published to the University of Chicago. She has no problem publishing her work. and this scandal has actually, as I said, brought a little extra attention to her work. So, but of course, you know, again, to come back to Bellow, there's this famous sentence at the beginning of The Adventures of Augie Marsh where he says, you know, if you hold down one thing, you hold down the adjoining. You know, to restrain freedom over here restrains freedom over here. You know? And it's tragic, I think, that this great scholar cannot have her work read, except on a Kindle, in the country that she wrote it about, and has spent her life trying to understand.
My recollection, Paul, is something similar happened to you a few years ago.
Yeah, it did. But, you know, I'm still here and the Ayatollah Khomeini is not.
There is that. Where are we? Oh, there's, yeah.
Actually, you know, just to respond to that also, what you had said, and then my question after that. Perhaps we in India and Pakistan don't like our religious traditions to be rich, whether they are Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, or whatever. We like life to be more simplified, perhaps. One of Wendy Doniger's points in the book is that a lot of the way we approach our religion, the Hindu religion, in India, is what the British have bequeathed to us. And here lies the irony. You know, you've said such perceptive, such illuminating things, and I'm all with you on that. And the fact that you are a post-colonial also makes a lot of sense. But a lot of us in the subcontinent are living still in the colonial era. And again, going back to something that you said earlier, that our laws are still in English. The irony here is that the very law that Wendy Doniger's opposers are invoking in this case is a law that was made in 1861 by the British.
Yeah, it's a colonial law.
The blasphemy law in Pakistan was made by the British.
Yes.
And we are so rigidly following the colonial practices to this day. Your comments would be very
No, I mean, I think that's just, it's just right. It's just so, you know. And it's a shame because, as I say, I think people's everyday life of India has very little to do. People don't think about the British Empire anymore, and yet it is still there, enshrined in these codes that can be used against homosexuals, that can be used against literature, etc. You know, 377 is a colonial law as well. You know, so there is these terrible problems which require a different breed of politician to deal with them. But unfortunately, we have this bunch of assholes. You know? and what are we going to do with them? You know, because these are people of such either great weakness or great ruthlessness. They're certainly not ethical people or principled people or progressive people. You know, and how do you, as a nation, progress if your leaders are of that kind? You know. This is not only the case in India. There are other countries of the world which at various times one has been able to say that about their leaders, including this one. Maybe not right now, but in the very recent past. But it's a problem. And what worries me most is the attitude of the masses of India ranging from apathy towards an acceptance of the idea that you should prevent people saying things that offend people. I think there is, unfortunately, very broad acceptance of that idea. That the filmmaker, the scholar, the artist, the writer who is accused of offending people is blamed by most people for having done that. You know, it is not the fault of the bigot attacking him. It is his fault for having inflamed the bigot. You know, it's as if you were to annoy somebody who takes out a gun and kills you, and his defense is that you annoyed him. And that's a complete defense. That's a complete defense, right? You could go to court and say, I killed him because he annoyed me. And they would say, oh, well, in that case, you know, there's the door.
He deserved it.
You know, exactly. But this is the cockeyed situation in which you get into when you begin to accept the offendedness argument. You know, you criminalize the innocent and you excuse the guilty. And this I do have some memory of, you know, personal memory of. There were an enormous number of people willing to say that I had brought the problem on my own head, you know, and that the people attacking me were justified, even though they were bombing bookstores, murdering translators, shooting publishers. That was okay, because I was the criminal, you know. And this is the upside down world that India is now in. Very broad acceptance of the idea that the person who rocks the boat, the person against whom the finger is pointed, is the guilty one. And that these Batras are innocent. You know, so if India doesn't unscramble that, then I fear for it. I genuinely fear for it in the future.
There's a similar logic at work in the case of that horrible case of the woman that was raped by a gang of
Yes.
guys, and some people who would have been sympathetic to the attempt to ban or to take Wendy's book out of Doniger's book out of circulation made a similar argument that she had, and I think you talked about this last night, that she had, if she had been more
Yes.
circumscribed.
She crossed the Lakshman Rekha.
That's right.
You know, it was exactly that, and it's appalling, you know. But I mean, this is something we know about in the West too. There used to be many people in the West who would say, well, if you wear a miniskirt, you know, you're expecting to be raped.
Right.
You know, people have kind of stopped saying that. But there was that attitude quite commonly expressed for a long time. And in India, it's still expressed. You know, what was she doing on a bus with men in the evening? After 7 p.m. She was on a bus with men. What does she expect? You know? She expects to go somewhere in a bus. That's what she expects, and it's perfectly reasonable that she should take a bus rather than be. And you know, it has happened in India now. Women are scared of going out in the evening alone.
Yeah.
You know, it's actually the case. After darkness, it's scary. And it would be nice, I think, if the Indian authorities, instead of pursuing books and films and writers, tried to protect women. You know, tried to protect people who actually are in danger. Because the terrible rape of the woman we're not allowed to name for reasons I don't accept. I think not naming her is also a way of forgetting her. You know, naming her is a way of remembering her and honoring her. And I think this whole business about how she must not be named, even though we all know what her name is, you know, there's something weird about that. But you know, since that case, there have been many cases, in many cases. And then you get, I mean, I heard people from the BJP making this difference between India and Bharat, right? So these rapes happen in India, right? Westernized, decadent, degraded India, where women feel they can go out after 7 p.m. on a bus. But they don't happen, allegedly, in Bharat, traditional India. Whereas actually one of the things we know is that it happens enormously in Indian villages, and we know that most of these crimes are crimes inside the family. You know, they're crimes committed by fathers or uncles or, you know, etc. And this is, and very often panchayats deal with them in the most harsh way. They give like a $50 fine, you know, 50 rupee fine, 100 rupee fine, you know, for raping your granddaughter, you know. Or they tell the woman that she should marry the man, etc. I mean, this happens every day in Bharat. You know, so this idea that this is because of Western practices having corrupted Indian women to behaving badly, it's another of the pieces of bullshit that is everywhere right now. I mean, you can't go to India now without wading through bullshit that's waist deep, you know, and I really fear for the culture of this country. I really do, because it needs such a clear, such a root and branch rethink. You know, we have to rethink the entire relationship between men and women in India, and to the disadvantage of the men. you know, who are horrendously advantaged at the moment. We have to rethink the whole question of liberty, you know, and who is to blame in an assault of this kind. You know, who is to blame in an assault on a book? Who is to blame in an assault on a girl? You know, who are the criminals and who are the innocent people? We've got this wrong. You know, and I think we have to start having that conversation in public. I mean, like this, we have to start talking about these things.
In Bharata, this could happen, how in Mahabharata Draupadi was raped?
Yeah, I know. That's a little while ago, but but I'm saying in the 21st century, it happens every day. Happens every day.
See, we have.
What you said about Indian English reminds me of years ago, the comment that my guru, my teacher that time, Dr. Courtright knows, late Dr. Fenton, what he said, that Indian English is not particularly British English, it's a dialect. And everywhere, because English is so versatile, whichever place it goes, it takes the color and the flavor of that language. So
I even think the word dialect is, you know, carries connotations of secondary status. You
Yeah.
know? And I wouldn't even call it that. You know, I think at this point, it's a pretty confident and assertive
full-fledged.
language.
Yes.
You know, thrice, quarter plate, under trial, eve teasing.
But probably what he meant
You know,
was the
police encounter, etc. You know, it's a pretty extensive language right
right,
now.
I believe so. And the second thing you said about that good literature, good means genuine literature, makes you think. It should be thought-provoking. It should break some of the status quo.
Yeah.
But where do you put then the biographical, inspirational literature? Literature which inspires, literature which is, say, during the Indian independence movement, there are many, many novels written by Munshi, Kannailal Munshi. So some of that literature also
Yeah, of course.
is very
I mean,
good.
I'm not saying that literature should only question.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, some of the best novels written recently, I mean, for instance, take Vikram Seth's Suitable Boy. You know, neither formally nor in its content is it very radical.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's very long. But that's the most radical thing it does. You know, it's actually a very classical, conventional piece of realist storytelling. You know, and an extremely good one. Yes. You know, and certainly, if Vikram was sitting here, because Vikram and I have had this argument in public, he doesn't agree with me. You know, my view is that literature happens at the edge, not in the middle. You know, my view is that original literature is created by artists who go to the boundaries and push outwards. You know, Vikram doesn't think that's so. Vikram thinks you can sit in the center of the culture and create great beauty. You know, and he's shown it. You know, in his own work. So the point is, there isn't ever one thing. Literature is many things.
Subjective.
Yes, it can be inspirational, it can be realist, naturalist, conservative, and excellent. You know, I mean, so I'm not trying to say there's only one way to write. You know, that would be stupid. I'm just saying that possibility must exist. You know, that many, if you look at any literature in any age, there are those artists who go to the edge and push. You know, when Osip Mandelstam wrote his poem about Stalin, he knew that Stalin wasn't going to like it. You know? And Stalin didn't like it, and he died in a labor camp, Mandelstam. You know, but he still published the poem. You know, and the history of literature is full of this. You know, Lorca was murdered by Franco's, goons, because Lorca was opposed to the Phalange, but he didn't conceal the fact that he was opposed to the Phalange. So if you look at, in any culture, any literature, you see how courageous writers have been in standing against the status quo, when they don't believe in it, when they believe it to be wrong. Now, you don't have to. You don't have to. There's no rule which says you have to, but you should be able to. You shouldn't be criminalized for doing so, Even if this new BJP view of Hinduism now has very wide acceptance in India, which to an extent it does, because the BJP has been pushing it since the 70s, and the BJP has its following. So, but even if that's so, that many people, the large percentage of the Indian population that are BJP-walas, even if that's what they believe that Hinduism is, and therefore they dislike what Wendy Doniger is saying that it's something else, she must be able to say it. She must be able to say it. Even if the book was terrible, as it happens, it's a work of considerable scholarship. Even if it was a terrible book, she should have been able to say it. You can't only have freedom of speech for good books. You have to have freedom of speech for crap as well. All of this is what I think people are very confused about in India now. Because of this wide acceptance of the idea that it's wrong to offend people, religious sensibility in particular. It's wrong to offend religious sensibility. Well, the European Enlightenment was based on offending religious sensibility. When Diderot wrote The Nun, he did it because he knew it would piss off the Catholic Church. The whole point was to tell the Catholic Church, with its inquisitions and anathemas and so on, that it would no longer be allowed to place limiting points on thought. And it was the defeat of the Catholic Church by the Enlightenment that makes possible the present idea of freedom of speech. The battle was not fought against the state, it was fought against the church. And now, different church, same battle.
I'm mindful we're out of time, right? It's like that with conversations with you.
I talk too much.
No, the time flies by.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.